Captain Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire had seen many species fall before their mighty war fleets. The crystalline beings of Xerion Prime had lasted 3 cycles before surrendering. The gas dwellers of Neptune's edge had crumbled in mere rotations. Each conquest followed the same pattern: initial resistance, tactical retreat, negotiated surrender, and, finally, integration into the Empire's vast network of subjugated worlds. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Talon, Zethkar studied the tactical displays showing Earth's solar system. Intelligence reports described the humans as a relatively young species, barely 2,000 years into their recorded civilization. Their technology seemed primitive by galactic standards, still relying on chemical propulsion for most of their spacecraft. They had only recently achieved faster-than-light communication, and their weapons technology appeared to be generations behind even the weakest Empire vassals. Commander, his aide, Subcaptain Veltar, approached with the latest reconnaissance data. The human fleets have taken defensive positions around their outer planets. They're following standard defensive doctrine, just as predicted. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. Of course they are. Every species learns the same basic principles of warfare. Protect your resources, maintain supply lines, avoid unnecessary casualties. The humans may be primitive, but they're not stupid. The Vorthak Empire had perfected the art of conquest over millennia. Their strategy was both elegant and effective. Demonstrate overwhelming force, target key infrastructure, offer reasonable surrender terms, and avoid the messy business of total annihilation. It preserved valuable worlds and populations while minimizing losses on both sides. Most civilized species recognized the futility of prolonged resistance and accepted incorporation into the Empire with minimal bloodshed. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Earth," the communications officer announced. "It appears to be some kind of formal response to our surrender demand." Zethkar settled into his command chair. "Display it." The main screen shimmered, revealing a middle-aged human in what appeared to be a military uniform. The being had pale skin, dark hair beginning to show gray, and small, predatory eyes that seemed to bore directly into the camera. When it spoke, universal translators rendered its words in perfect Vorthak. "I am Admiral Sarachun of the United Earth Defense Force. We have received your ultimatum and considered your terms. Our response is simple. No. Earth will not surrender. We will not submit to your empire. If you want our world, you will have to take it from us, and we will make you pay for every meter of ground, every breath of air, every drop of water. We know we cannot match your technology or numbers, but we will show you something your empire has apparently forgotten: the price of determination." The transmission ended abruptly. Zethkar stared at the blank screen, surprised by the human's directness. Most species at least attempted to negotiate, seeking better terms or more time. This Admiral Chun had offered nothing but defiance. "Well," Veltar said after a moment, "that was unexpected. Should we begin the standard bombardment sequence?" Zethkar considered. The human's response violated every rule of civilized warfare. When faced with overwhelming odds, rational beings sought compromise, not futile resistance. Perhaps these humans needed a demonstration of Vorthak power before they would see reason. "Begin with the outer colonies," he ordered. "Target their mining stations on the asteroid belt. Minimal force, just enough to show them what we're capable of. They'll change their minds once they see our weapons in action." The Vorthak fleet moved with practiced precision. Their ships, each one a kilometer-long masterpiece of engineering, glided through space like predatory fish. Plasma cannons charged, missile tubes loaded with fusion warheads, and shield generators hummed at full power. It was a sight that had brought 1,000 worlds to their knees. The first target was Ceres Station, humanity's largest asteroid mining facility. Intelligence suggested it housed nearly 50,000 human workers and their families. The plan was simple: disable the station's defenses, demonstrate Vorthak firepower, and offer the inhabitants a chance to surrender. It was a textbook operation that had worked flawlessly for centuries. What happened next would haunt Zethkar for the rest of his life. As the Vorthak ships approached Ceres Station, they detected no defensive fire. The human vessels in the area, small cargo haulers, and mining ships had already evacuated. The station itself appeared to be powering down its systems in preparation for surrender. Everything proceeded exactly as expected. Then, the station exploded. Not from Vorthak weapons, but from within. The humans had somehow rigged their entire facility with explosives, turning their own home into a massive bomb. The blast was so powerful it damaged 2 Vorthak destroyers that had moved in close to accept the expected surrender. Debris and radiation spread across thousands of kilometers, making the entire area hazardous to navigation. Sir, Veltar's voice carried a note of shock. We're receiving multiple transmissions from human vessels throughout the system. They're all saying the same thing. Put it through. A young human male appeared on screen, his face streaked with tears but his voice steady. This is Captain Michael Rodriguez of the cargo vessel New Horizon. We have followed the example of Ceres Station. Rather than allow our ships and resources to fall into your hands, we have chosen to deny them to you permanently. We die free, and we die as humans. The transmission cut off, followed immediately by a brief flash of light as the New Horizon self-destructed. Similar flashes began appearing throughout the asteroid belt as one by one, human vessels followed suit. Mining stations, cargo ships, scientific outposts, all choosing destruction over capture. Zethkar stood frozen, watching as an entire human civilization systematically destroyed itself rather than submit. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered such behavior. It violated every principle of rational warfare, every instinct for survival that drove intelligent life. Commander, his tactical officer reported, voice uncertain. We're detecting massive explosions throughout human space. It appears they're destroying their own infrastructure on multiple worlds. Manufacturing centers, spaceports, even civilian installations. This is madness, Veltar whispered. They're committing species suicide. Don't they understand we're offering them a chance to live under Imperial rule? Their lives would continue, their children would be educated, their civilization preserved. But Zethkar was beginning to understand something that chilled him to his core. The humans weren't committing suicide. They were sending a message. Every explosion, every destroyed station, every sacrificed life was telling the Vorthak Empire exactly what conquest of Earth would cost. The humans were rewriting the rules of war. Over the following days, reports flooded in from across human space. The pattern was consistent and terrifying, complete denial of all resources to the invading force. Humans weren't just destroying military targets. They were systematically eliminating anything that might be useful to an occupying army. Food production facilities, water treatment plants, power generators, transportation networks, all reduced to rubble by the humans themselves. Sir, the intelligence officer approached with a trembling report. We've decoded some human communications. They call it Scorched Earth Doctrine. It's apparently a historical strategy they've used in previous conflicts among their own kind. Zethkar read the report with growing unease. The concept was alien to Vorthak thinking. When the Empire conquered a world, they expected to inherit its infrastructure, its population, its productive capacity. That was the entire point of conquest, to add value to the Empire. What the humans were proposing would leave them with a dead, worthless rock floating in space. They can't be serious, he muttered. No species would deliberately render their own world uninhabitable. But the evidence suggested otherwise. Intelligence indicated the humans were evacuating their major population centers, dispersing into smaller, more defensible positions. They were stockpiling weapons and supplies in underground bunkers. Most disturbing of all, they were sharing technical information on how to create improvised explosives and booby traps with their entire population through their global communication networks. The humans weren't just preparing to fight an army. They were preparing to fight a war of annihilation. Zethkar called a meeting of his senior staff. The conference room aboard the Crimson Talon had witnessed the planning of dozens of successful conquests. Maps of defeated worlds lined the walls, each one a testament to Vorthak's strategic superiority. Now, looking at the tactical displays showing Earth and its system, those victories seemed like hollow achievements. Options, he asked curtly. General Krextar, his chief military advisor, spoke first. Direct assault remains viable. Our forces significantly outnumber theirs, and our technology is superior. We estimate we could break their organized resistance within 6 to 8 cycles. At what cost? Zitkar demanded. Heavy, Krextar admitted. Their scorched earth tactics would force us into prolonged urban combat on a world they're systematically destroying. Casualties could reach 30% of our ground forces. Naval losses would be minimal, but the campaign would require significant resources. Sub-Admiral Thys, his naval specialist, added her analysis. The humans appear to be implementing some kind of distributed command structure. Even if we eliminate their central government and military leadership, local commanders seem authorized to continue resistance independently. We could find ourselves fighting hundreds of separate conflicts simultaneously. Zethkar studied the reports, trying to comprehend the human strategy. The Empire's military doctrine was built around decisive engagements, clear objectives, and rational opponents. The humans seem to be deliberately violating all 3 principles. What do we gain from this conquest? He asked finally. Our intelligence suggested Earth possessed valuable resources, skilled populations, strategic positioning for further expansion. If the humans destroy all of that, we gain nothing, Veltar said quietly. Worse than nothing. We would expend massive resources to claim a devastated world populated by a species that has proven it would rather die than submit. The administrative costs alone. The truth hung in the air like a noxious gas. The humans had found a way to make conquest cost more than it was worth. They had turned their own weakness, their inability to match Vorthak military power, into a strength by making themselves too expensive to defeat. There's something else, the intelligence officer added hesitantly. We're detecting increased communications traffic between Earth and several uncontacted species in nearby systems. The humans appear to be sharing information about their defensive strategies. Zethkar felt his blood turn cold. Bad enough that one species was implementing these suicidal tactics. If the strategy spread to other worlds, if other species began adopting human-style total resistance, the implications were staggering. The Vorthak Empire's entire model of expansion was based on cost-effective conquest. They could win any individual battle, but they couldn't afford to fight every war as a battle of annihilation. The resources required would bankrupt the Empire within a few generations. Sir, Veltar spoke carefully. Perhaps we should consider alternative approaches. Negotiation, extended siege, economic pressure. The humans have already rejected negotiation, Krextar pointed out. As for siege, they've demonstrated they're prepared to starve rather than submit. Economic pressure requires willing trading partners. The humans have shown they'd rather destroy their own goods than trade with us. Zethkar stood and walked to the viewing port, staring out at the distant blue world that was causing him so much trouble. Earth looked so peaceful from this distance, a small marble of white clouds and blue oceans. It was hard to believe that such a beautiful world harbored a species apparently bent on its own destruction. Sir, Veltar prompted, your orders? Zethkar continued staring at Earth, wrestling with a decision that would define his career and possibly change the course of Imperial expansion. The humans had created a paradox. They were too weak to defeat the Empire in conventional warfare, but too destructive to be conquered profitably. They had found a way to win by losing, to resist by surrendering everything that made resistance worthwhile. For the first time in his long military career, Zethkar was beginning to understand that there might be some things more important than victory. The humans had just taught him a lesson that no Vorthack military academy had ever considered. Sometimes the only way to truly defeat an enemy was to make victory impossible to achieve. Maintain position, he ordered finally. Continue monitoring human activities. No offensive actions without my direct authorization. His staff exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the decision, but they followed orders. As they filed out of the conference room, Zethkar remained at the viewing port, studying Earth and wondering what other surprises humanity might have in store for the galaxy. He had no idea that this was only the beginning. The humans were just getting started, and their next moves would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about warfare, civilization, and the nature of sentient life itself. 3 weeks into what should have been a routine conquest, Zethkar found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans had maintained their defensive positions around Earth, but their behavior continued to defy all military logic. Instead of the expected negotiation attempts or gradual weakening of resolve, human activity had actually increased. "Sir, you need to see this." Subcaptain Veltar approached with yet another intelligence report that would undoubtedly contain more impossible human behavior. The main display showed real-time footage from their surveillance drones monitoring Earth's surface. Major cities that had been evacuated weeks earlier were now buzzing with activity again, but not the kind Zethkar expected to see. Instead of desperate preparations for siege or frantic attempts to build defensive positions, the humans appeared to be celebrating. "Is that music?" General Krextar asked, his mandibles clicking in confusion. Indeed, the audio feeds from multiple Earth cities were picking up what universal translators identified as musical performances, large gatherings, and what appear to be festivals. In New York, London, Tokyo, and dozens of other major population centers, humans had returned not to cower in fear of impending invasion, but to hold massive public celebrations. What are they celebrating? Zitkar demanded. Their impending conquest? Have they finally decided to surrender? The communications officer looked up from her station. "Sir, we're receiving dozens of transmissions from Earth. They don't appear to be surrender offers. They're invitations." Invitations to what? To join their celebrations. They're calling it the Last Freedom Festival, and they're broadcasting it on all frequencies. They say they want to share human culture with the galaxy before. The officer paused, checking her translation. Before they take the Empire down with them. Zethkar stared at the displays, watching as millions of humans filled the streets of their cities. They were singing, dancing, sharing food, and engaging in what appeared to be various forms of artistic expression. Children played games while adults performed music and poetry. It looked less like a species preparing for extinction and more like the largest party in galactic history. "They're insane," Krextar muttered. "Completely, utterly insane." But Zethkar was beginning to see something else in the human behavior. This wasn't madness, it was strategy. The humans weren't just preparing to die. They were preparing to die in a way that would be remembered. They were creating a narrative, a story that would spread throughout the galaxy long after Earth was gone. "Patch me through to Admiral Chun," he ordered. "Sir," Veltar looked surprised. "Are you planning to negotiate?" "I'm planning to understand." The transmission connected after a brief delay, revealing the same human admiral who had initially refused their surrender demand. But now, instead of a sterile military backdrop, she appeared to be standing on a platform overlooking one of the massive human celebrations. Music and laughter could be heard in the background. "Captain Zethkar," Admiral Chun said with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "I was wondering when you'd call. Would you like to join us? We're having quite a party down here." "Admiral, I don't understand your species' behavior," Zethkar said bluntly. "You face extinction, yet you celebrate. You can negotiate for survival, yet you choose death. Explain this to me." Chun smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. "You know, Captain, when we first detected your fleet, our military strategists ran every possible scenario. Conventional warfare, guerrilla tactics, diplomatic solutions. technological advantages we might develop. Every single analysis reached the same conclusion. We cannot defeat the Vorthak Empire in any traditional sense. Then why resist? The Empire offers generous terms to conquered species. Your people would be relocated to suitable worlds, your culture preserved, your children educated in imperial academies. As subjects, Chen interrupted. As conquered people, as slaves with comfortable chains. She paused to wave at the crowd below her, and they responded with a massive cheer. Do you know what humans call that kind of life, Captain? We call it a living death. Zethkar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. So you choose actual death instead? We choose freedom, Chen replied simply. But more than that, we choose to demonstrate something that your empire has apparently never encountered. We choose to show the galaxy what the price of conquest really looks like when a species decides they'd rather cease to exist than submit to tyranny. The transmission feed suddenly expanded to show multiple views of the celebration. Zethkar could see that it wasn't just party. It was a coordinated broadcast being transmitted on every frequency humans could access. Children were drawing pictures showing the beauty of their world. Musicians were performing songs about freedom and resistance. Poets were reciting verses about the value of self-determination. You're making propaganda, Zethkar realized. We're making history, Chen corrected. Every species in the galaxy is going to remember what happened here. They're going to remember that when the mighty Vorthak Empire came to conquer Earth, humanity chose to burn everything rather than submit. And they're going to ask themselves a very important question. What question? Chen's smile became predatory. They're going to ask whether they want to be next. And, more importantly, they're going to ask whether they're brave enough to follow our example. The implications hit Zethkar like a plasma cannon to the chest. The humans weren't just resisting conquest, they were weaponizing their own destruction. They were turning their defeat into a recruitment tool for future resistance movements throughout the galaxy. You're trying to start a rebellion, he said. We're trying to start an awakening, Chen replied. For too long, species have submitted to conquest because they assumed it was better than extinction. We're showing them that there's a third option, making conquest so costly that empires think twice before attempting it. As if to emphasize her point, new data began flooding Zethkar's screens. Intelligence reports showed increased activity in dozens of systems throughout Vorthak space. Species that had been peacefully conquered decades or centuries ago were showing signs of unrest. More concerning, several unconquered worlds that had been marked for future expansion were beginning to implement defensive strategies remarkably similar to those demonstrated by Earth. Sir, his intelligence officer reported with poorly concealed panic, we're detecting weapon stockpiling in the Kepler 442 system. The Zephyrians appear to be mining their own cities with explosives. They're also broadcasting some kind of manifesto about learning from human courage. The Tau Cetans are doing something similar, another officer added. They're calling it Scorched World Protocols, and they're sharing technical specifications with neighboring systems. She must have been monitoring Vorthak communications because her smile widened. It's already spreading, isn't it? The idea that conquest doesn't have to be profitable for the conqueror. That resistance doesn't have to be about winning. It can be about making sure the other side loses too. Zethkar realized with growing horror that the humans had identified a critical flaw in the Vorthak expansion model. The Empire could conquer any individual world, but they couldn't afford to fight every species that decided to follow the human example. If even a fraction of their target worlds chose destruction over submission, imperial expansion would become economically impossible. You're destroying galactic stability, he accused. The Empire has brought peace and order to thousands of worlds. The Empire has brought compliance and stagnation, Chen shot back. How many species have simply given up their dreams of independence because resistance seemed hopeless? How many civilizations have accepted mediocrity because they were afraid to fight for something better? She gestured to the celebration behind her, where humans of all ages were creating art, music, and literature with desperate passion. Look at us, Captain. We're about to die, and we've never been more alive. We're producing more art, music, poetry, and philosophy than in any period of our history. When people think their freedom is worth dying for, they discover what freedom actually means. Madness, Krextar muttered from behind Zethkar, but Chen had apparently heard him. General, your empire has existed for thousands of years, and what has it produced? What art, what music, what philosophy has emerged from your peaceful, orderly, conquered worlds? What innovations have come from species too afraid to risk failure? What beauty has been created by people too secure in their subjugation to dream of something greater? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Zethkar found himself thinking about the conquered worlds he had visited, the neat, orderly, productive colonies that supplied the empire with resources and tribute. When had he last seen anything creative or innovative emerge from any of them? When had any conquered species produced something that surprised or delighted him? Efficiency and order are their own values, he said, but the words sounded hollow, even to himself. Are they? Chen asked. Tell me, Captain, when you conquer Earth, if you conquer Earth, what exactly will you have gained? A dead world stripped of resources, populated by the survivors of a people who chose death over your rule. Will that make the empire stronger? Will it inspire loyalty in your other subjects? Will it make the next conquest easier or harder? More intelligence reports were arriving by the minute. The human broadcast was being picked up by species throughout the galaxy, and the response was unlike anything in Imperial history. Some civilizations were expressing support for human resistance. Others were beginning to question their own submission to various empires and hegemonies. Most disturbing, several species were actively requesting human technical advice on defensive protocols. We're losing control of the narrative, Veltar reported quietly. Human propaganda is spreading faster than we can counter it. It's not propaganda, Chun said, apparently still monitoring their communications. It's truth. We're showing the galaxy what determination looks like. We're proving that freedom isn't something you can take from a species that refuses to give it up. Zethkar studied the celebrations on his screens, trying to understand how his straightforward conquest mission had turned into something resembling a galactic philosophical crisis. The humans were supposed to be primitive, easily conquered, quickly integrated into the empire. Instead, they had somehow turned their own weakness into a weapon that threatened the fundamental assumptions underlying imperial expansion. What do you want? He asked finally. Nothing you can give us, Chen replied. We want our freedom, our independence, our right to succeed or fail on our own terms. You cannot grant those things. They can only be taken by force or preserved by sacrifice. Then, this conversation is pointless. Not all, Chen said. This conversation is being broadcast throughout the galaxy. Millions of beings are listening to a Vorthack captain talk to a human admiral about freedom and resistance. They're hearing you admit that you cannot give us what we want most. They're learning that some things cannot be conquered, only destroyed. Zethkar realized he had been manipulated. This entire conversation was part of the human strategy, another piece of their propaganda campaign. He started to terminate the connection, but Chun spoke again. Captain, let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to attack Earth, and you're probably going to win. Your technology is superior, your forces outnumber ours, and we've deliberately weakened ourselves by destroying our own infrastructure. You'll plant your flag on our Capitol building and declare victory. She paused, looking directly into the camera with those unsettling human eyes. But every species in the galaxy will remember that it took the mighty Vorthack Empire months to conquer a single, primitive world that was trying to kill itself. They'll remember that your victory cost you more than any defeat. And they'll start asking themselves whether your empire is really as powerful as it claims to be. The transmission ended, leaving Zethkar staring at a blank screen while celebration music from Earth continued to play in the background. Around him, his officers stood in uncomfortable silence, each presumably wrestling with the same questions that plagued their commander. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had turned their own inevitable defeat into a strategic victory by redefining what victory meant. They had proven that conquest was only profitable when the conquered cooperated, and they had broadcast that lesson to every species in the galaxy. For the first time in his military career, Zethkar found himself wondering whether his victory would really be worth achieving. The attack on Earth began at dawn, Terra Standard Time, exactly 47 days after the Vorthak fleet first entered the solar system. Zethkar had delayed as long as possible, hoping that either the humans would reconsider their position or that High Command would provide guidance on dealing with an enemy that seemed determined to make victory meaningless. Neither had happened. "All ships report ready, sir," Veltar announced from his position at the tactical station. Around them, the bridge crew carried out their duties with mechanical precision, but Zethkar could sense their unease. This was not the glorious conquest they had signed up for. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from Earth," the communications officer reported. "Same source as before." "Admiral Chun?" Zethkar asked. "Yes, sir. She says she has a final message for you before hostilities begin." Zethkar almost refused the transmission, but curiosity won over caution. The main screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Chun standing not in a command center, but in what appeared to be a simple human dwelling. She was wearing civilian clothing and holding a small human child who could not have been more than 5 standard years old. "Captain," she said simply, "I wanted you to meet my daughter, Sarah." The child looked directly at the camera with bright, curious eyes that reminded Zethkar uncomfortably of her mother's steady gaze. When she spoke, her voice was clear and innocent. "Hello, Captain Zethkar. Mommy says you're going to hurt us because your people want to make us into slaves. But we won't let you. We choose to be free." Zethkar felt something twist in his chest that he could not quite identify. The child seemed genuinely unafraid, as if she was discussing something as ordinary as the weather. "Captain," Admiral Chun continued, "I want you to understand something. In about an hour, this little girl is going to die. Not because she's done anything wrong, not because she poses any threat to your empire, but because she was born human and humans refuse to kneel. She'll die free, Captain, and she'll die with more dignity than anyone who spends their life serving masters they didn't choose." The child smiled at the camera. "Will you remember me, Captain? Will you remember Sarah Chun when you tell your people about conquering Earth?" The transmission ended. Zethkar stood frozen, staring at the blank screen. Around him, the bridge had fallen completely silent. He realized that the humans had just committed what might have been their most devastating act of psychological warfare yet. They had put a face on their resistance, made it personal, forced him to confront exactly what his victory would cost. "Sir," Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. "Your orders?" For a long moment, Zethkar said nothing. Then, with effort, he forced himself back into the role of Imperial Commander. "Begin the assault." What followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. The human defense of Earth was simultaneously the most ineffective and most effective resistance the Vorthak had ever encountered. Their weapons were indeed primitive, their tactics predictable, and their forces vastly outnumbered. Within 6 hours, Imperial forces had achieved orbital supremacy, destroyed the remnants of Earth's space fleet, and begun landing operations on all major continents. But every human position that fell was a Pyrrhic victory for the Empire. Cities were rigged with explosives that detonated the moment Vorthak forces took control, ensuring that conquest yielded only rubble. Military bases self-destructed rather than allow their weapons to be captured. Industrial facilities were rendered useless by their own workers before Imperial troops could secure them. Casualty report, Zethkar requested after the first day of ground operations. Imperial losses are at 4%, and rising, Krextar reported grimly. Human losses approach 60% of their total military forces. But, sir, he paused, checking his data again. Every major human city we've captured has been rendered completely uninhabitable. Total resource recovery from conquered territories is effectively zero. They're doing it again, Veltar observed. They're winning by losing. But the humans weren't finished. As Imperial forces consolidated their positions, they discovered that the humans had prepared one final surprise. Every major population center contained massive underground bunkers filled not with weapons or supplies, but with archives. Digital libraries containing the complete history, culture, literature, music, and scientific knowledge of the human species, all packaged for transmission to the rest of the galaxy. Sir, the communications officer reported with confusion. We're detecting massive data transmissions from Earth to dozens of different star systems. The humans appear to be broadcasting their entire civilization. Zethkar pulled up the transmission logs, trying to understand what the humans were attempting. The data streams were enormous, containing terabytes of information about human history, philosophy, art, science, and culture. They were sending copies of everything they had ever created to any species willing to receive it. They're preserving themselves, he realized. Even if we destroy Earth completely, human civilization will survive in the archives they're sharing with the galaxy. Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the communication system one final time. She was transmitting from somewhere deep underground, probably one of the last human strongholds still holding out against Imperial forces. Captain Zethkar, by the time you receive this message, Earth's surface will probably belong to your empire. Congratulations on your victory. I hope it was everything you dreamed it would be. Her voice carried a note of exhaustion, but also something that sounded almost like pity. You came here expecting to conquer a world and add its people to your empire. Instead, you've spent weeks watching a species destroy itself rather than submit to your rule. You've watched children prepare for death with more courage than most Imperial soldiers show in battle. You've seen an entire civilization choose extinction over subjugation. There was a pause, during which explosions could be heard in the background of the transmission. But here's what you haven't realized yet, Captain. You haven't conquered humanity. You've liberated it. You've freed us from the illusion that survival is more important than freedom. You've taught us that some things really are worth dying for. And we've taught the galaxy that lesson too. The transmission quality began to deteriorate as whatever facility Chun was broadcasting from came under attack. The data streams we're sending out contain more than just our history and culture, Captain. They contain our methods, technical specifications for the weapons we used, tactical manuals for asymmetric warfare, psychological profiles of successful resistance movements. We're giving every future target of Imperial expansion a blueprint for making conquest profitable. Zethkar felt a cold dread settling in his chest as he realized the full scope of what the humans had accomplished. We can't defeat your empire, Captain, but we can bankrupt it. Every world you conquer from now on will have access to human resistance techniques. Every species you target will know that they have alternatives to submission. You've created your own worst nightmare, an enemy that multiplies with every victory. The sound of weapons fire grew closer to Chen's position. Tell your emperor something for me, Captain. Tell him that humanity says thank you. Thank you for showing us what we're truly capable of when we stop being afraid. Thank you for proving that freedom is worth any price. And thank you for making our sacrifice meaningful. The transmission cut off abruptly as Chen's position was finally overrun. In the silence that followed, Zethkar stared at his tactical displays, showing a planet that was technically conquered, but practically worthless. Every major city was in ruins, every industrial facility destroyed, every resource extraction site sabotaged beyond repair. The few surviving humans had either died fighting or disappeared into wilderness areas where they continued a guerrilla war that showed no signs of ending. Sir, Veltar approached with the final casualty and resource reports. The planet it's ours, technically, but administrative costs for maintaining occupation will exceed any possible revenue from the conquest by several orders of magnitude. How many human survivors? Zethkar asked. Difficult to estimate. Perhaps 10% of the original population scattered and in hiding. They continue to conduct irregular warfare against our occupation forces. Zethkar nodded slowly, then turned to his communications officer. Give me high command. The response from Imperial headquarters was swift and predictable. Emperor Vorthak himself appeared on the screen, his ancient features carved with the arrogance of a ruler who had never encountered meaningful resistance. Captain Zethkar, the Emperor said, congratulations on your conquest of the human homeworld. The Empire is pleased with your success. Your Majesty, Zethkar replied carefully, I must report that while Earth is now under Imperial control, the conquest may have created unforeseen complications. Complications? The humans' resistance methods are spreading to other systems, Majesty. Intelligence reports suggest that 12 potential conquest targets are implementing defensive strategies based on human techniques. More concerning, 17 currently peaceful Imperial protectorates are showing signs of unrest inspired by human propaganda. The Emperor's expression darkened. Are you telling me that a single primitive world has destabilized our expansion plans? I'm telling you that the humans have demonstrated that conquest is only profitable when the conquered choose to cooperate, Zethkar replied. They have shown the galaxy that resistance is possible, and that some forms of victory are indistinguishable from defeat. For a long moment, the Emperor studied Zethkar through the transmission, perhaps trying to determine whether his captain was showing signs of disloyalty or simply reporting unpalatable facts. What is your assessment, Captain? Can this problem be contained? Zethkar looked around his bridge, taking in the faces of officers who had witnessed humanity's final lesson to the galaxy. They all understood what he was about to say, and none of them disagreed with his conclusion. No, Your Majesty. I believe this problem will spread throughout the galaxy until every species understands that they have alternatives to submission. The humans have rewritten the rules of conquest, and I don't think we can change them back. The Emperor's face remained impassive, but Zethkar could see the calculations running behind those ancient eyes. The Vorthak Empire had built its power on the assumption that resistance was futile and conquest was inevitable. If even a fraction of their target species began following the human example, imperial expansion would become economically impossible within a generation. Return to base, Captain, the Emperor ordered finally. We will reconsider our expansion strategies. The transmission ended, leaving Zethkar alone with the knowledge that humanity's greatest victory had been achieved through their own complete destruction. They had proven that sometimes the only way to win was to make sure everyone lost, and they had taught that lesson to a galaxy that would never forget it. Standing at the viewing port, looking down at the broken, burning world that had somehow defeated one of the most powerful empires in galactic history, Zethkar found himself wondering what other surprises humanity might have left for him to discover. 6 months after the conquest of Earth, Zethkar found himself stationed at a forward base on the rim of Imperial space, watching the galaxy burn with the fire of revolution that humanity had lit with their own destruction. What had started as a simple conquest mission had evolved into something that threatened the very foundations of galactic civilization. The reports arriving at his command post painted a picture of unprecedented chaos across known space. The Andromedans had followed the human example exactly, destroying their entire industrial infrastructure rather than allow it to fall into the hands of the hegemony of Zix. The crystalline entities of the Tau system had somehow convinced 3 neighboring species to form a scorched space alliance dedicated to making conquest economically impossible for any expanding empire. Sir, Subcaptain Veltar approached with the latest intelligence summary, his expression grim. The situation continues to deteriorate. 7 more systems have declared independence from their imperial overlords in the past week alone. They're all citing human inspiration in their declarations. Zethkar reviewed the data, noting the familiar patterns. Each rebellion followed the same basic template that humanity had pioneered: systematic destruction of anything valuable to an occupying force, dispersal of populations into defensible positions, and the broadcast of resistance techniques to neighboring systems. The humans had created a template for revolution, and species across the galaxy were adapting it to their own circumstances. "Any word from High Command on our new orders?" he asked. "That's complicated, sir." Veltor hesitated. "High Command is dealing with internal problems. Apparently, some of our own protectorate species are beginning to question the terms of their membership in the Empire." This was news that chilled Zethkar to his core. The Vorthak Empire controlled hundreds of worlds, most of which had accepted imperial rule decades or centuries ago in exchange for protection and technological advancement. If those species began to reconsider their agreements, which species specifically, he demanded. The Kepler 442 colonies have formally requested renegotiation of their tribute agreements. The Proxima settlements are demanding representation in imperial governance. Most seriously, the entire Centauri sector is threatening to secede if they don't receive full political autonomy within the next standard year. Each name hit Zethkar like a physical blow. These weren't primitive worlds being contacted for the first time. These were established imperial territories that had been peaceful and productive for generations. The idea that they would suddenly develop revolutionary aspirations was almost incomprehensible. "They can't be serious," he said finally. "They know what happens to systems that rebel against the Empire." "Do they?" Veltor asked quietly. "Sir, with respect, what exactly does happen to systems that rebel? We've always maintained control through the threat of overwhelming force, but the humans prove that overwhelming force is meaningless if the target is willing to destroy everything you're trying to capture." The question hung in the air like an accusation. For the first time, Zethkar found himself examining the fundamental assumptions that had guided imperial policy for millennia. The Empire maintained order through the promise of prosperity and the threat of annihilation. But what happened when species stopped fearing annihilation? What happened when they started seeing it as preferable to submission? "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Centauri sector," the communications officer announced. "It's marked as urgent and addressed to you personally." "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a being Zethkar recognized with growing unease. Chancellor Kresna of the Centauri Colonial Authority was a longtime imperial ally, a model of cooperation and successful integration into the Empire. Her species, the Centaurians, were known for their pragmatism and their commitment to peaceful coexistence. "Captain Zethkar," Chancellor Kresna began, her voice carrying an unfamiliar note of steel. "I trust you are well. I am contacting you because you were present at the conquest of Earth, and I believe you may be the only Imperial commander who truly understands what the humans accomplished." "Chancellor," Zethkar replied carefully, "I hope this transmission doesn't indicate any problems in your sector." "On the contrary, Captain, this transmission indicates that we have finally found a solution to our problems." Kresna's expression was calm, but her words carried implications that sent ice through Zethkar's veins. "We have studied the human example extensively, and we have concluded that they discovered something remarkable, the power of unacceptable alternatives." "I don't understand." "For 3 centuries, Captain, the Centauri sector has provided tribute to the Empire in exchange for protection and technological advancement. We accepted this arrangement because the alternatives seemed worse: conquest, devastation, absorption into a less benevolent empire. But the humans taught us that there is always another alternative." Zethkar leaned forward in his command chair. "Chancellor, surely you're not threatening to follow the human example?" "Not threatening, Captain. Promising." Kresna's smile was serene and terrifying. "We have spent the last 6 months preparing our entire sector for what we call dignified termination. Every major industrial facility, every resource extraction operation, every technological installation has been rigged for complete destruction. Our entire population has been trained in resistance techniques and dispersed into defensive positions." "You're talking about species suicide," Zethkar said, horrified. "We're talking about species liberation," Kresna corrected. For 3 centuries, we have lived comfortable lives as imperial subjects. We have been happy, prosperous, and safe. But we have not been free. The humans reminded us what freedom actually costs, and they proved that some prices are worth paying. Around Zethkar, his bridge crew listened with growing alarm as one of the Empire's most reliable protectorates calmly described their plans for self-destruction rather than continued submission to imperial authority. "Chancellor, be reasonable," Zethkar pleaded. "The Empire has treated the Centauri sector with respect and fairness. Your people have prospered under imperial protection. Why would you throw that away for an abstract concept like independence?" "Because prosperity without freedom is just another form of slavery," Kresnar replied simply. "Because safety without dignity is just another form of death. Because the humans proved that some things really are more important than survival." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a note of genuine sadness. "Captain, I want you to understand that this decision brings us no joy. We don't want to die. We don't want to destroy everything we've built. But we've realized that as long as we remain imperial subjects, we will never truly live. We will never know what we might have accomplished, what heights we might have reached, what dreams we might have achieved if we had been free to pursue them. The Empire doesn't prevent you from pursuing your dreams," Zethkar protested. "Imperial worlds are centers of learning, innovation, cultural exchange. Imperial worlds are centers of conformity," Kresna interrupted. "Oh, we innovate, but only within parameters acceptable to imperial authorities. We create art, but only art that supports imperial values. We explore, but only in directions that serve imperial interests. We have spent 3 centuries being the best imperial subjects we could be, and we've forgotten what it means to be ourselves." The transmission quality began to shift as Kresna apparently prepared to end the communication. "Captain, I'm sending you detailed specifications of our defensive preparations. We want the Empire to understand exactly what conquering the Centauri sector will cost. We want High Command to know that their victory will be measured in dead worlds and empty systems. And we want every other Imperial Protectorate to see what determination actually looks like. Chancellor, please." Zethkar made one final attempt. "There must be some way to negotiate. Some compromise that preserves your autonomy while maintaining your relationship with the Empire. Captain, you still don't understand what the humans taught us. Compromise is what got us into this situation. Negotiation is how we became subjects in the first place. The only way to be truly free is to reject the entire premise that our freedom is something that can be granted or taken away by others." The screen went dark, leaving Zethkar staring at his reflection in the blank display. Around him, the bridge crew sat in stunned silence as they absorbed the implications of what they had just witnessed. "Sir," Veltar spoke quietly, "if the Centaurians follow through on their threat, and if other sectors follow their example, the Empire ends," Zethkar finished. "Not through conquest or revolution, but through the simple refusal of its subjects to remain subjects." For the first time, he truly understood the scope of what humanity had accomplished. They hadn't just resisted conquest. They had fundamentally altered the relationship between rulers and ruled throughout the galaxy. They had shown every subjugated species that submission was a choice, not an inevitability, and that alternatives to submission always existed for those brave enough to embrace them. "Sir," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving similar transmissions from 17 other Imperial sectors. They're all requesting copies of the Centaurian defense plans." "And from outside Imperial space?" Zethkar asked, though he already suspected the answer. 43 different star systems have requested technical assistance with implementing human-style defensive strategies. "Captain, it's spreading faster than we can track it." Zethkar stood and walked to the viewing port, staring out at the stars and wondering how many of them now harbored species that had learned humanity's final lesson. The galaxy looked the same as it always had, but he knew that everything had changed. The age of easy conquest was over. The time when superior technology and overwhelming force could guarantee victory had passed. Humanity had died to teach the galaxy a simple truth. Freedom was not something that could be taken away from those unwilling to give it up. They had proven that every tyrant, no matter how powerful, was ultimately dependent on the cooperation of the tyrannized. And they had shown the universe what happened when that cooperation was withdrawn, regardless of the cost. Sir, Veltar approached with a personal communication device. High Command is requesting a full strategic assessment of our current situation. They want recommendations for dealing with what they're calling the human contagion. Zethkar took the device, staring at it for a long moment before beginning to compose his response. He knew that his assessment would likely end his career and possibly his life, but he also knew that honesty was the only option left. He began to type. The human contagion cannot be contained because it is not a disease. It is an awakening. Humanity has reminded the galaxy that freedom is the natural state of intelligent life, and that all authority ultimately rests on consent. That consent is now being withdrawn throughout known space, and no amount of force can compel its return. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Recommendation. The Empire must evolve or die. We can no longer rule through fear and force. We must find ways to earn the loyalty of our subjects, or we must accept that the age of empire is ending. As he prepared to send a message that would likely destroy everything he had spent his life building, Zethkar found himself feeling something unexpected: relief. The humans had freed the galaxy from the illusion that might made right, and in doing so, they had freed him from the burden of enforcing that illusion. For the first time in his military career, he felt proud of what he was about to do. 2 years after the conquest of Earth, former Captain Zethkar stood in the ruins of what had once been the Vorthak Imperial Academy on Theros Prime. The massive complex, which had trained military officers for 1,000 years, was being systematically dismantled by its own former students. The empire that had seemed eternal was dying, not through external conquest, but through the quiet withdrawal of consent that humanity had made inevitable. Captain Zethkar, the voice belonged to a young Centaurian female wearing the simple gray robes of the Galactic Freedom Council. I'm Dr. Salar Kresna, daughter of Chancellor Kresna. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Zethkar turned from his contemplation of the demolished training grounds. The daughter bore a strong resemblance to her mother, but her eyes held something the Chancellor had never possessed during her years of Imperial service: complete, uncompromising freedom. Dr. Kresna, he acknowledged. I assume this isn't a social visit. Not entirely, she smiled. I'm here representing the Council's historical documentation project. We're interviewing everyone who was present during the human resistance to Earth's conquest. Your perspective as the commanding officer of the invasion fleet would be invaluable to our understanding of how humanity changed galactic civilization. They walked together through the Academy grounds, past training facilities that would never again produce Imperial officers, past monuments to military victories that now seemed like relics from a different universe. The irony was not lost on Zethkar that he was being interviewed about the end of empire in the ruins of the institution that had created the Empire's military elite. Where would you like me to start? He asked. At the beginning, Salar replied. When you first received orders to conquer Earth, what did you expect to find? Zethkar considered the question, trying to remember the mindset he had possessed before humanity had shattered every assumption he held about warfare and civilization. I expected to find another primitive species that would follow the standard pattern, he said finally. Initial resistance, tactical retreat, negotiated surrender, integration into the Empire. It was supposed to be routine, but it wasn't routine. No, from the very beginning, the humans behaved in ways that defied all military logic. They refused to negotiate. They destroyed their own infrastructure rather than allow us to capture it. They treated their own deaths as strategic advantages rather than tactical failures. Salar made notes on a portable recording device as they walked. According to our research, this was your first encounter with what humans called asymmetric warfare. How did you initially interpret their strategy? As madness, Zethkar admitted. My staff and I couldn't comprehend why any species would choose extinction over subjugation. It violated every rational principle of survival that we thought drove intelligent behavior. When did you realize it wasn't madness? That question stopped Zethkar in his tracks. He stood silent for a long moment, remembering the exact instant when humanity's strategy had become clear to him. When I spoke with Admiral Chun and her daughter, he said quietly, when I realized that the humans weren't just resisting conquest, they were redefining what conquest meant. They were teaching the galaxy that some victories are indistinguishable from defeats. Can you elaborate on that? Zethkar resumed walking, leading Salar toward what had once been the Academy's Strategic Studies building. The Empire's entire expansion model was based on the assumption that conquered species would cooperate with their conquerors because the alternatives were worse. Humans proved that assumption wrong. They showed that if a species is willing to accept any cost to remain free, then conquest becomes economically and strategically impossible. Even when the conqueror possesses overwhelming technological and numerical superiority, especially then, Zethkar emphasized, superior technology means nothing if there's nothing left to capture. Overwhelming force becomes a liability when using it destroys everything you're trying to possess. Humans turned our own strength against us. Salar nodded, making additional notes. Our historians have identified what they call the human paradox, the idea that the weaker force can achieve strategic victory by making tactical defeat inevitable for both sides. Do you believe this paradox is what ended the age of imperial expansion? They had reached the entrance to the Strategic Studies building, its doorway now sealed with debris from the demolition. Zethkar studied the ruins, thinking about all the military theories that had been taught within these walls, all the strategies for conquest and control that had seemed so sophisticated just a few years ago. The human paradox didn't end the age of imperial expansion, he said. It exposed the fact that the age had already ended, and we just hadn't realized it yet. Humans showed the galaxy that authority without consent is an illusion, and that illusion can be dispelled by anyone brave enough to refuse cooperation. Is that why the Empire collapsed so quickly after Earth's conquest? The Empire didn't collapse, Zethkar corrected. It was abandoned. Once our subject species realized they had alternatives to submission, they simply stopped being subjects. There's no force in the universe that can compel loyalty from those who choose freedom over safety. Salar looked up from her recording device. That's an interesting perspective from someone who spent his career enforcing imperial authority. Do you regret your role in the Empire's expansion? Zethkar considered the question seriously. It was something he had wrestled with during the long months of watching galactic civilization transform itself. I regret the suffering that imperial expansion caused, he said finally. I regret the civilizations that spent centuries in comfortable subjugation when they could have been exploring their own potential. But I don't regret my role in humanity's final resistance, because that resistance freed not just humans, but every species in the galaxy. Including your own? Especially my own. The Vorthak were as much prisoners of the imperial system as any of our subjects. We had built our entire identity around domination and control, and we had forgotten what it meant to earn respect rather than demand submission. Humans reminded us that true strength comes from inspiration, not intimidation. Salar made additional notes, then asked, "What do you think humanity's ultimate legacy will be?" They had completed their circuit of the Academy grounds and were standing once again in the main courtyard, surrounded by the debris of 1,000 years of military tradition. Overhead, the sky was filled with ships bearing the flags of dozens of newly independent worlds, species that had thrown off the chains of various empires and hegemonies in the wake of humanity's example. I think, Zethkar said slowly, that humanity's legacy will be the knowledge that freedom is always possible, no matter how overwhelming the odds against it. They proved that tyranny is fundamentally dependent on the cooperation of the tyrannized, and that cooperation can always be withdrawn by those brave enough to pay the price. Even when that price is extinction, especially then, humans showed us that some things really are more important than survival. They proved that a life lived in dignity, even if brief, is preferable to centuries of comfortable subjugation. That lesson has spread throughout the galaxy, and I don't think it can ever be forgotten. Salar finished a recording and prepare to leave. Thank you, Captain. Your insights will be invaluable to future historians trying to understand how a single species changed the course of galactic civilization. Dr. Kresna, Zethkar called as she started to walk away. May I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret that humanity had to die to teach us these lessons? Do you think there could have been another way? Salar considered the question seriously before answering. I've studied human history extensively, Captain. They had a saying, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots. I think they understood that freedom always comes at a cost, and that someone has to be willing to pay that cost for everyone else. And you think their sacrifice was worthwhile? Captain, look around you. Salar gestured to the demolished academy, the ships of free worlds in the sky above, the bustling activity of species that were building their own futures rather than serving someone else's empire. Humanity didn't just save themselves. They saved all of us. They reminded us what we were meant to be. After she left, Zethkar remained in the courtyard for a long time, watching the sun set over the ruins of the institution that had shaped his early life. Tomorrow, he would begin his new job with the Galactic Freedom Council, helping to mediate disputes between newly independent worlds and teaching former imperial species how to govern themselves. It was not the career he had planned, but it was the career he had chosen. Like every other being in the galaxy, he had learned humanity's final lesson, that freedom was not just about the right to succeed, but about the right to fail on your own terms. As darkness fell over Theros Prime, Zethkar found himself thinking about a small human child named Sarah Chun, who had died free rather than live as a slave. Her brief life had helped change the course of galactic history, proving that individual courage could reshape the universe itself. He hoped that wherever human consciousness might exist now, in whatever form their legacy might take, they knew that their sacrifice had not been in vain. They had given the galaxy something precious beyond measure, the knowledge that freedom was always possible for those brave enough to claim it. The stars above seemed brighter somehow, filled with worlds where species were discovering what they could accomplish when they answered to no master but themselves. It was humanity's final gift to the universe, the chance to find out what life could be like when it was truly free. And in the ruins of empire, new civilizations were being born that would never again accept that might made right, never again believe that security was worth more than liberty, never again forget the lesson that a single species had died to teach them. Humanity had kept their promise. They had taken the empire down with them. And in its place, they had left something far more beautiful, a galaxy learning how to be free.